everybody and welcome to another video. So as you know, my channel is mainly focused on travelling and cruises. So whenever I post a cruise vlog and cruise videos, things like that, I do get comments and questions on my videos, and one that I get most often is about ports, and more specifically a day during a port day. So I thought, let's do a video on it and let's talk through a typical port day. And I'm also going to do the same for a typical day at sea as well, because I get questions for both, like what to do and timings arriving in ports and things like that. So I'm going to start off with, in today's video, will be a typical port day. Now I want to start off by saying that everybody's different, everyone wants to do different things, not everyone's plans are the same when going on a cruise or when visiting a port. So I'm firstly just going to say you can do anything you want. You really can when you're on a cruise. So I'm just going to give more of a typical day, so like scheduling and things like that. And this could change depending on what cruise you're on. Sometimes some ports you may arrive really early and sometimes you may arrive later on in the morning. So it really does depend on your cruise itinerary. And I will also say, if you've got a cruise booked and you're wanting to know scheduling and times like that, they are just estimates currently. Nothing is sort of set in stone, because it could be due to operational reasons, it could be due to weather, other things as well that factor into times and scheduling. So nothing's set in stone, but it is estimated, and usually they do stick to the estimate. So a typical port day starts off early morning. It usually is. Most of the cruises that I've done, you are starting to arrive or arriving into your port of call that day, and that can be starting from 6 AM, 7 AM, sometimes it can be later, sometimes it can be earlier, but usually you wake up, it's around 7 o'clock and you're just about to go in, or you're just about to start docking. And sometimes as well, if your plan of arrival involves something well known, something famous, for example, when you go into Lisbon, there's a famous bridge that the ship always goes under to arrive at the dock. The captain usually announces the day before the planned time or the planned schedule. So if you want to wake up and get your cameras ready and watch the ship go under the bridge, you can. So they do make announcements for famous things, just so you don't miss out really. So it's always good that they do things like that, but there are times that I have certainly missed out on things because I've overslept, or I've woken up, gone, no, I'm too tired, and I go back to bed. So I do miss something. So once you've arrived at the port, you've docked, they've put the ropes out, you're securely there, they've done all of their immigration and security checks and everything like that. The captain or the first officer or an officer of the bridge comes over the tannoy and announces that the gangway is now open for you to disembark and visit the location. And again, this is typically morning, so it can be from 7:30, 8, 8:30. I've not been on a cruise where it's been any later than about 8:30, 9, but sometimes there can be itineraries where you arrive at a port a bit later. And during this announcement from the bridge, they also advise the places to disembark and visit. So they usually say the gangway is located on deck 4 forward or deck 4 aft, so you know where you're heading. But there are always times when you don't listen and you're walking around aimlessly trying to find the gangway. Now, disembarkation can be slightly different if you're visiting a port that requires a tender boat. And a tender boat, if you don't know, is where the ship sort of anchors out slightly because the port might not be big enough or might not have a large enough sort of docking area for the ship to actually dock. So they'll sort of anchor out a bit further, and then they use the life vessels, the tender boats, to then take you back and forth to the port. It's quite rare. There are a couple of places that I've done that have required tender boats, and it's a slightly different process, which I will explain further on. So if it's a normal gangway, you sort of get off the gangway. I was going to say you get off the plank, that's probably not the best word I should use. And usually as you're just heading off, there is a screen or some information there to advise you what time guests have to be back on board by. And depending on the port that you're visiting, this can range from early afternoon to late night. And just to note here, if you are leaving the ship and visiting the port on your own and you're doing independent walking, as my mum likes to call it, please don't be later than the time stated on the information, because they probably will leave you. And if you are exploring the port by yourself, you can just head on off where you want to go. You can either walk into some locations, or you can get a bus, public transport, taxis. There's always taxi ranks, and there's always people there waiting to put you in a taxi. So there's always transport there to take you where you want to go. And then for those of you who have booked an excursion independently, there will again be, I'm guessing you would have been advised if you booked the independent shore excursion, they will advise you where to meet them. But if you've booked the excursion through the cruise line, they will also give you information. It's usually via a ticket, or usually information on the daily newspaper that you get. So they will also advise you where to meet, what time, and where you're going to be going. We did a few excursions booked through P&O on our recent cruise on Britannia to the Caribbean, and the whole process was really smooth. We got a whole sort of bunch of tickets on, I think, the first day or during embarkation, and it gave me the time of the excursion, the time we need to be down there, and what it included. So it was really, really nice and easy, and they showed you where to go. There was staff on shore telling you where you needed to be, so you got on the right bus, you got in the right, you got in the right place, you got onto the right tour, and then you've got your day planned. So if you're on an excursion, you obviously do what was planned, what you wanted to go on, what you wanted to book it for, and there's so many interesting things as well to do there. And if you've booked independently, you can sort of do what you want, really, exploring, walking around, visiting places. I always plan things prior, so even if I'm going independently, if I'm exploring the port myself, I always Google the popular places, the well-known places, but also some places that are maybe sort of hidden spots that maybe not every tourist will be visiting the same day as you. So it's always good to research beforehand. I do feel like if it's a port that you don't really know much about, that you haven't really researched, or that you don't really know what to do, or if there's sort of too much to pack in, I always would recommend doing an excursion through the cruise line, because they do pack a lot in during the day, and I think they're really good for your money. Because sometimes I certainly noticed this during our Caribbean cruise, that if you pay for an excursion, it's much cheaper than paying for a taxi to go to the same place. So definitely, if you're unsure, go for the excursion. And the excursions are always booked by local agents, local people, locals, so they certainly know what they're talking about and what they're doing. Side note here as well, if you're still visiting a port, or if the ship's docked at a port and you've either been so many times and you don't necessarily need to get off for any reason, you can of course stay on the ship. I will say it's fairly quiet, which is quite nice sometimes, but the entertainment and activities planned isn't as much as on a sea day, because obviously they are predicting that the majority of guests are ashore. So just bear that in mind, but you can stay on the ship if you wanted to. And then once you've seen what you wanted to see, if you've had a bit of their cuisine, if you've been to all the tourist spots and you want to head back to the ship, that's when you can head back. As long as it's, yeah, not leaving it too late, you can sort of head back anytime really. Tip for you, if you have a balcony cabin and you like to people watch, I always say get back onto your balcony slightly earlier than the boarding time, if you're happy to, and sit on your balcony and watch everyone coming back and forth, watching all the people running, the people coming back onto the ship, because it's great for people watching. I think I've done that most cruises that I've been on. Every cruise we've been on, we have had a balcony, and that I do feel like is one of the reasons why we book a balcony, because we're quite nosy. So we do like to people watch and watch people get off the ship, come back on the ship. We also like to see if there are people running late, because almost every cruise you'll see people running, and I haven't had a cruise yet where they've left anyone behind, or not that I know of, but you can tell when maybe people haven't come back on the ship yet, because you sometimes get people walking up and down, like security, crew, just to see if there's any stragglers. But no, if you're a people person and like watching people, definitely get on board a bit earlier just to watch them come back. On the most recent cruises that I've been on, the two that I did last year, I think both of them, the times to get back on board was around 5:30, 6 o'clock. So that's the sort of a typical time. It can be a bit later. I remember in St Lucia it was 7 o'clock, and then we left St Lucia about 8 o'clock, but it is usually around sort of early, you know, late afternoon, early evening. And then it's around that time that they start getting the ropes back in. You can start hearing the thrusters going, and then that's when you start to leave. It's usually about an hour after the boarding time. And then that's also when the captain or another officer does an announcement just to state that everyone's on board, we've started getting the ropes back in, we've started the thrusters, the engines, everything's going again, and we will be sailing away shortly. And usually if you're visiting a port the next day as well, rather than like a sea day split in between, this is also when they do like a planned or estimated like weather report, temperature, if any other ships are due in that same port the next day as well. So they do a little recap and a little sort of not warning, but it's almost like some information that's given to you. And then I just want to go back to what I was saying about tenders. Now, every cruise line has a process in place for when you need to get a tender boat to a port. Again, it's not very common. It's not that often that you go on a cruise and there'll be a tender port. I know there can be sometimes in Norway. I know we used one for Garanga a couple of years ago, and that was nice and easy. It's just a slightly different process in which they tell you if you're wanting to go ashore, they advise you to go and wait. It's usually in one of the big rooms, so the theatre, one of the big lounges, and you usually get like a little ticket number, or like it's just like almost like a little just a little ticket really, a raffle ticket. That's what I was trying to say. And then it's not that long that you usually have to wait, but they usually like to have everyone in there, and then they'll usually call some numbers. So they'll call like from like 1 to like 100, and then they'll all go down and then go to where you need to get onto the actual tender boat. And then usually the actual boat trip is like 30 seconds. It's really not that bad at all. And the boat trips to come back are usually like every 20 minutes or so. They usually have a couple going at once, but it's sort of the same thing coming back. Instead of getting a raffle ticket, you just queue up where in the location that they've sort of taken you to, and then you just head on the tender boat when you can. And then when the ship is sailing again, everything is sort of back to the same daily routine. The entertainment's on, you can go for dinner. They usually sometimes put themed nights on depending on the port that you've been to. There's some really interesting things that they can do, which is great. And then it's getting ready for either the sea day the next day or another port day. So that is a typical port day. As I said, it can change depending on what port you go to, but that is sort of a general idea in terms of like scheduling times and times you need to get back on. I will also do a typical sea day, as obviously that's different. There's probably a lot more on, but I will wait to have a talk about that in my next video. So thank you for watching, and if you have any questions about a typical port day, please leave them below. Thanks for watching.